October 17, 2025. The White House. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky walks through the halls of American power wearing his signature olive green military jacket. Across the table sits President Donald Trump, who just 24 hours earlier held a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The stakes of this meeting cannot be overstated. At issue, a missile system that could strike the heart of Moscow. A weapon that Putin warns would trigger a qualitatively new stage of escalation, a game-changer that Zelensky believes is Ukraine's last best hope. Welcome to the Russia-Ukraine war in Oktober 2025, day 329 of the bloodiest conflict Europe has witnessed since World War II, and today, everything might be about to change. Over the next 50 minutes, you'll discover what's really happening in Ukraine right now, the diplomatic chess match playing out in Washington, the North Korean soldiers dying in their thousands on Russian soil, the drone strikes setting Russian oil depots ablaze from over 1,300 kilometers away, the hospital attacks, the energy grid destruction, and the quiet desperation of a nation fighting for survival against impossible odds. This isn't history. This is happening right now. And by the end of this documentary, you'll understand why the decisions being made this week could determine not just Ukraine's fate, but the future of global security itself. Let's begin with the most important meeting of the war. The Oval Office. October 17, 2025. Trump opens the meeting with words that immediately define the tone. Hopefully they won't need it, he says, referring to the Tomahawk missiles. Hopefully we'll be able to get the war over without thinking about Tomahawks. I think we're fairly close to that. It's a stunning statement. After 3 years of war, after over 1 million casualties, after entire cities reduced to rubble, the American president believes peace is fairly close. Zelensky, seated across from him in his military jacket, knows better. He's traveled to Washington with a singular mission: secure the weapons Ukraine needs to survive. And at the top of that list are Tomahawk cruise missiles. Here's why this matters. The Tomahawk is not just another weapon. It's a cruise missile with a range of approximately 2,500 kilometers. That's 1,550 miles. From Ukrainian territory, a Tomahawk could strike Moscow, St. Petersburg, deep military installations, the nerve centers of Russian power. Ukraine currently possesses drones and missiles with ranges of 300 to 500 kilometers. Effective but limited. Tomahawks would fundamentally change the strategic equation. Zelensky's argument is simple and compelling. We can already see that Moscow is rushing to resume dialogue as soon as it hears about Tomahawks, he said just days before this meeting. Simply having these missiles might be enough to force Putin to negotiate seriously. The threat alone could be the pressure point that ends the war. But Trump is hesitant. Tomahawks are a big deal, he tells reporters during the meeting. We want Tomahawks also. We don't want to be giving away things that we need to protect our country. The subtext is clear. America's stockpile is limited. Each Tomahawk costs approximately $1.5 million. Giving hundreds to Ukraine means fewer for American forces. Putin understands this leverage perfectly. During his phone call with Trump on Thursday, the Russian leader issued a stark warning. Supplying Ukraine with Tomahawks won't change the situation on the battlefield, but would cause substantial damage to the relationship between our countries, Putin's foreign policy advisor Yuri Ushakov revealed. It's a threat wrapped in diplomatic language. Give Ukraine these missiles and Russia-US relations collapse entirely. Trump, the dealmaker, sees an opportunity. He announces during the meeting something that catches everyone off guard. He's planning a summit with Putin in Budapest. Soon, possibly within weeks. The goal: negotiate an end to the war directly with the Russian leader. Zelensky's face during this announcement reveals everything: surprise, concern, the realization that his fate might be decided in a room he's not in. But there's another element to this diplomatic dance. Trump floats the possibility of a three-way negotiation, or perhaps separate meetings. They don't get along too well, those two, Trump says, referring to Zelensky and Putin. So we may do something where we're separate but equal. It's a phrase loaded with historical baggage in American politics, but in this context it reveals Trump's strategy. He believes he can broker a deal by shuttling between the two leaders, finding common ground neither can reach directly. Whether this will work is the billion-dollar question. Zelensky tries a different tactic during the meeting. He offers a trade. Ukraine has developed some of the world's most advanced military drones. Small, agile, deadly, and produced by the tens of thousands every month. Ukraine might give the U.S. Ukrainian drones in exchange for the Tomahawk missiles, he suggests. Trump's response is immediate and positive. We are, yeah. They make a very good drone. It's a potential breakthrough, a technology exchange that gives both sides something they want. But Trump remains non-committal on the Tomahawks themselves. The meeting ends without a firm decision. Zelensky will return to Ukraine without the guarantee he came for. But the conversation continues. And in the brutal mathematics of modern diplomacy, sometimes keeping the option alive is itself a victory. Now let's understand why Zelensky is so desperate. To grasp that, we need to see what's happening on the ground in Ukraine right now. October 14, 2025, 3:00 a.m. Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city. Air raid sirens wail across the darkness. Citizens have approximately 90 seconds to reach shelter. Then the sky erupts. Russian glide bombs, massive 2,500-kilogram weapons launched from aircraft deep inside Russian territory, slam into the city. One strikes Kharkiv's main hospital directly. The damage is catastrophic. 57 people wounded, 50 patients evacuated in the middle of the night, some on stretchers, some in wheelchairs, all traumatized. Zelensky calls it an utterly terrorist, cynical attack on a place where lives are saved. The targeting of a hospital is a clear violation of international law. Russia denies deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure, but the pattern is unmistakable. This same night, Russian forces strike energy facilities in the Kherson and Sumy regions. Power goes out for thousands. It's a familiar tactic. For 3 years running, Russia has targeted Ukraine's power grid before winter. The strategy is simple and horrific. Leave millions of civilians without heat, light, or power during the coldest months. Break their will to resist through suffering. The statistics are staggering. Ukraine has lost 80% of its thermal power generation capacity due to Russian attacks. 60% of its total electricity generating capacity has been destroyed or is under occupation. The country now relies primarily on 3 Soviet-era nuclear power plants for 2/3 of its electricity. When those plants need maintenance or face threats, entire regions go dark. But the hospital attack isn't even the worst incident of the day. The same morning, a United Nations humanitarian convoy drives through the Kherson region. 4 trucks clearly marked with World Food Program branding. They're delivering food and medical supplies to civilians in the frontline town of Bilozerka. These aren't military vehicles. They're aid workers doing what aid workers do, feeding hungry people in a war zone. Russian drones and artillery open fire. 2 trucks are destroyed. 1 burns completely. Miraculously, no one is killed, though the psychological impact is profound. UN Humanitarian Coordinator for Ukraine, Matthias Schmele, releases a statement. This is a violation of international law. Humanitarian convoys are protected under the Geneva Conventions. Attacking them is a war crime. Russia's response? Silence initially, then later, vague denials. It's a pattern that has repeated throughout this war. Attack, deny, move on. The international outrage cycle lasts approximately 48 hours before the next atrocity replaces it in the news. These attacks are not random. They're strategically timed. Zelensky is in Washington asking for Tomahawks. What better way to strengthen his argument than fresh evidence of Russian brutality? Every missile that strikes a hospital, every humanitarian convoy attacked, every power plant destroyed bolsters the case that Ukraine needs long-range strike capability to target the launch sites, command centers, and logistics hubs from which these attacks originate. But here's the grim reality. Ukraine is losing this war of attrition. Not quickly, not dramatically, but incrementally, inexorably, like water wearing away stone. Look at the territorial statistics. In the 4-week period from September 16th to October 14th, 2025, Russian forces gained 123 square miles of Ukrainian territory. That's down from 226 square miles the previous month, which some analysts cite as evidence that Russian momentum is slowing. But step back and see the bigger picture. Russia now controls 115,077 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. That's 44,431 square miles, approximately 19% of Ukraine's total land area, an area roughly equivalent to the entire U.S. state of Ohio. And this figure includes Crimea, which Russia seized back in 2014. and portions of the Donbass that were under separatist control before February 2022. Since the full-scale invasion began on February 24, 2022, Russia has seized an additional 28,532 square miles. That's territory taken in this war, not counting what was already occupied. It's an area equivalent to half the size of Iowa, gained at a cost of over 790,000 Russian casualties killed and wounded. According to U.S. military estimates, Ukraine's losses are also catastrophic. President Zelensky stated in January 2025 that Ukraine had suffered 400,000 killed and wounded. The figure is now certainly higher. Some Western intelligence agencies suggest the true number may exceed 500,000. These aren't just statistics. They're fathers, sons, brothers, husbands, an entire generation of Ukrainian men gone. The human cost extends beyond military casualties. Over 14,000 Ukrainian civilians have been confirmed killed. The actual number is certainly higher, as thousands remain missing or buried under rubble in occupied territories. 9.5 million Ukrainians, 22% of the pre-war population, have been displaced. Some fled abroad. Others are internally displaced, living as refugees in their own country. This is the context in which diplomacy happens. Ukraine is bleeding, slowly, steadily, unsustainably, without a dramatic change, without new weapons, without something to shift the strategic balance. Ukraine faces a future of endless grinding attrition until either its army breaks or the West's political will to support it collapses. And that's where the Tomahawks come in. Or rather, where Ukraine hopes they'll come in. While diplomatic negotiations play out in Washington, the war on the ground continues with relentless brutality. And one of the most shocking developments of this entire conflict is playing out right now in Russia's Kursk region. They're called meat waves, human wave attacks, that would have been familiar to soldiers in World War I or the Korean War. Masses of men, poorly equipped, sent forward in suicidal charges against entrenched positions. Machine guns cut them down by the dozens. The survivors advance a few meters. The next wave attacks repeat until the objective is taken or the attackers are annihilated. This isn't Russian troops we're describing. It's North Korean soldiers, and they're dying in catastrophic numbers. The story begins in October 2024. Western intelligence detected something unprecedented. North Korea was deploying approximately 12,000 troops to Russia, not as advisors or observers but as combat soldiers. They came from North Korea's 11th Corps, elite special forces units. The Storm Corps, soldiers trained in infiltration, reconnaissance, and light infantry combat. But Russia isn't using them as special forces. Russia is using them as expendable infantry. Cannon fodder to fill gaps in Russian lines devastated by 3 years of attrition warfare. And the North Koreans are paying a horrific price. By January 2025, South Korea's National Intelligence Service reported approximately 300 North Korean soldiers had been killed and 2,700 wounded. By March, that number had exceeded 4,000. By May, it reached nearly 5,000. Current estimates as of October 2025 suggest total North Korean casualties, killed and wounded, may exceed 5,000 out of the original 12,000 deployed. That's a casualty rate of over 40% in less than 1 year of combat. Why are the losses so catastrophic? Multiple factors. First, the North Koreans lack experience in modern combined arms warfare. They're trained for a very different kind of conflict on the Korean peninsula. The flat, open terrain of western Russia and eastern Ukraine is entirely foreign to them. They've trained for mountain warfare, urban combat, infiltration behind enemy lines, not massed assaults across open fields covered by Ukrainian drones, artillery, and machine guns. Second, the language barrier is enormous. North Korean troops operate under Russian command, but few speak Russian and few Russian officers speak Korean. This communication breakdown means North Korean units often don't receive proper artillery support, can't call for medical evacuation, and don't coordinate effectively with adjacent Russian units. They're essentially isolated in the middle of the battlefield. Third, and most damning, Russia and North Korea treat these soldiers as expendable. Ukrainian President Zelensky stated it bluntly. Russian military and North Korean overseers are not at all interested in their survival. Intelligence reports indicate North Korean soldiers carry notes ordering them to commit suicide rather than be captured. Self-detonate if cornered. Die before dishonoring the regime. Some have been captured anyway. In mid-October 2025, Ukraine announced it had captured North Korean soldiers. One appears in a video released by Ukrainian intelligence, young, confused, injured. He speaks through interpreters describing how he was told he was going for training exercises, not combat. South Korean intelligence reports that many North Korean troops didn't even know they were being deployed to Ukraine until they were already in Russia. Back in North Korea, the casualties are creating social strains. Many North Korean soldiers are only children due to the country's poverty and unofficial population control. Families are desperate to prevent their sons from being drafted for what amounts to a suicide mission. Some young men are reportedly self-mutilating to avoid conscription, cutting off fingers, deliberately breaking bones, anything to be medically disqualified. The Kim Jong-un regime's response has been propaganda. State media released images in August 2025 of Kim personally placing medals beside portraits of soldiers killed in Ukraine, declaring them national heroes. It's an attempt to frame the deaths as noble sacrifice rather than pointless slaughter. Whether ordinary North Koreans believe this is another question. Meanwhile, intelligence suggests North Korea is preparing a third deployment of approximately 6,000 additional troops to replace losses. The cycle continues. Russia gets cannon fodder, North Korea gets cash, food aid, and most importantly, advanced military technology. Reports suggest Russia is sharing missile guidance systems, satellite intelligence, and possibly even submarine technology with Pyongyang in exchange for troops and ammunition. This alliance of desperation between two pariah states is reshaping the geopolitical landscape. If North Korea can field test its weapons and tactics in Ukraine, learn from modern combat, and receive advanced technology from Russia, the threat to South Korea, Japan, and U.S. forces in the Pacific multiplies. The Ukraine war is no longer just about Europe. It's a global conflict with implications stretching from Seoul to Tokyo to Guam. And while North Koreans die in Russia's Kursk region, Ukraine is striking back in ways that would have been unimaginable at the start of this war. October 13, 2025, the city of Feodosia occupied Crimea. Home to Russia's largest oil depot on the peninsula, massive storage tanks holding millions of liters of fuel for Russia's Black Sea Fleet, and military operations across southern Ukraine. In the pre-dawn darkness, Ukrainian drones approach. Not large military drones, not expensive imported systems. These are homemade FPV, first-person view drones, modified racing drones carrying explosive payloads. They strike. The explosion is massive. Fuel ignites. Within minutes, a column of black smoke rises thousands of feet into the air. Satellite imagery shows the smoke plume visible from over 25 kilometers away. The fire burns for 2 days. Russian occupation authorities struggle to contain it. Local media reports suggest multiple storage tanks were destroyed, containing tens of millions of liters of fuel. This single strike demonstrates the evolution of Ukrainian warfare. 3 years into this conflict, Ukraine has become the world leader in military drone technology. Not the most advanced, not the most sophisticated, but the most innovative, creative, and effective use of cheap, mass-produced drones to achieve strategic effects. Here's how it works. A Ukrainian drone operator sits in a basement or bunker dozens of kilometers from the target. They wear FPV goggles showing the real-time view from the drone's camera. The drone itself costs approximately $300 to produce. It's built from off-the-shelf components: a Chinese racing drone frame, commercial electronics, a cheap camera, and an explosive-shaped charge. Production time a few hours. Production scale. Ukraine is manufacturing over 100,000 per month as of late 2024, with capacity increasing. The pilot flies the drone manually, dodging Russian electronic warfare jamming, avoiding anti-aircraft fire, navigating at high speed toward the target. When they reach it, they dive directly into it. Kamikaze strike. The drone and pilot's hours of training are traded for millions of dollars in damage. It's asymmetric warfare at its finest, and Ukraine is striking deep. The October 15th attack on a Russian oil refinery in Ufa, over 2,300 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, represents a new milestone. That's deeper into Russia than Ukraine has ever struck before. The Bashneft refinery complex in Ufa has a total capacity of 23 to 26 million tons per year. It's a critical node in Russia's energy infrastructure. Ukrainian drones have forced nearly 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity offline at various points in 2025. Approximately 70% of these shutdowns are directly linked to Ukrainian drone strikes. This isn't just military interdiction, it's economic warfare. Russia's economy depends on oil exports. Refining capacity determines how much processed petroleum products can be sold abroad. Destroying refineries reduces Russian government revenue, which funds the war. The economic impact is significant. One journalistic investigation estimated Ukrainian strikes on Russia's energy sector have caused at least $7 or $14 million in damage. That's confirmed damage. The actual figure, including indirect costs, lost production, and economic disruption, likely exceeds several billion dollars. But Ukraine is paying a price too. Russia responds to drone attacks with missile barrages. October 2025 has seen a surge in Russian strikes on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Moscow's strategy is clear. If Ukraine strikes our energy sector, we'll obliterate yours. And Russia has far more missiles than Ukraine has drones. The exchange rate is devastating. As of early October 2025, Ukraine relies on emergency diesel generators to keep critical infrastructure running. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Europe's largest nuclear facility, has been running on backup generators for 3 weeks. This is extraordinarily dangerous. Nuclear plants require constant power for cooling systems. If those generators fail, the risk of meltdown becomes real. Work is scheduled to begin this week to restore external power links to Zaporizhzhia, but it requires a localized ceasefire. Russia and Ukraine must agree to stop shelling the area long enough for repair crews to work. Mikhail Ulyanov, Russia's representative to international organizations in Vienna, acknowledges it's vital to agree on a local ceasefire. Whether this happens remains to be seen. 3 years of war have made trust impossible. Meanwhile, shelling near the plant continues. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported on October 7th that 2 rounds of shelling struck around 1.25 kilometers from the perimeter of the plant. Each side blames the other. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi warns repeatedly that the situation is unsustainable. One miscalculation, one badly aimed shell, and Europe faces nuclear disaster. This is the reality of the war in October 2025. Technological innovation meets desperate brutality. Ukrainian drones strike deep into Russia, while Russian missiles obliterate Ukrainian power plants. North Korean soldiers die in human waves while diplomats negotiate in Washington. Hospitals burn and humanitarian convoys are attacked while politicians speak of peace summits. And underneath it all, a grim arithmetic. Russia loses approximately 30,000 soldiers killed and wounded every month. Ukraine's losses, while lower, are still catastrophic for a nation of 40 million. Both sides are bleeding. Both are desperate. Neither can achieve decisive military victory. And so the war grinds on. But there's one more element to this story that changes everything. China. While the world focuses on Russian aggression and Ukrainian resistance, Beijing watches carefully. China's role in this war has been deliberately ambiguous, officially neutral, calling for peace talks, but the reality is more complex. Recent reports indicate Chinese shipments of key drone components to Russia have surged. Exports of fiber optic cable, essential for drone communications, rose nearly tenfold from July to August 2025. Lithium-ion battery shipments also increased dramatically over the summer. These aren't weapons per se. They're dual-use technology, but without them, Russia's drone warfare capability collapses. China is essentially sustaining Russia's war effort while maintaining plausible deniability. Beijing can claim it's not sending weapons, only civilian technology, but everyone knows these components end up in Russian military drones and missiles. It's a carefully calibrated policy designed to weaken the West, test American resolve, and gain leverage over Russia, all while avoiding direct confrontation. For Xi Jinping, the Ukraine war is a laboratory. How does the West respond to aggression? How long will Western unity last? What level of economic pain can democracies tolerate before their publics demand peace at any price? The lessons China learns in Ukraine will directly inform its calculations regarding Taiwan. If the West arms Ukraine effectively, sustains support despite economic costs, and ultimately helps Ukraine survive or even win, China concludes that invading Taiwan would be catastrophically expensive. But if Western support eventually wavers, if Ukraine is forced to cede territory, if Putin achieves even a partial victory, China learns that aggression can succeed. The implications ripple across the Indo-Pacific. This is why the Tomahawk decision matters so profoundly. It's not just about missiles. It's about signaling resolve, showing that democracies will provide the weapons necessary to defeat aggression, that borders cannot be changed by force. That might does not make right. Trump understands this, which is why he's conflicted. Providing Tomahawk signals strength but risks escalation. Withholding them preserves negotiating space with Putin, but signals wavering commitment. There's no clean answer, only trade-offs between competing risks. And this brings us to the crucial question: how does this war end? Trump believes peace is close. He said it repeatedly. In his meeting with Zelensky, he expressed optimism that the war could end soon, possibly even before his planned meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping at the end of October. If flexibility is shown, I think we have a very good chance of bringing this war to conclusion, Trump said. But what does flexibility mean? For Trump, it likely means Ukraine accepting territorial losses, recognizing that Crimea is gone, that parts of the Donbass will remain under Russian control, that sovereignty is negotiable. In exchange, Ukraine receives security guarantees, reconstruction aid, and a path toward EU membership. For Zelensky, flexibility means something different. Ukraine might accept a temporary freeze of the conflict along current lines if backed by ironclad Western security guarantees. NATO membership or equivalent, sufficient weapons to deter future Russian aggression, and crucially, no formal recognition of Russian territorial gains. For Putin, flexibility means Ukraine abandons hopes of NATO or EU membership, accepts Russian annexation of occupied territories, and agrees to constitutional limits on its military and foreign policy. Essentially, Ukraine becomes a neutral buffer state with limited sovereignty. These positions are irreconcilable, which is why the war continues despite everyone claiming they want peace. The terms each side considers acceptable are unacceptable to the others. Trump's strategy appears to be using leverage to move the parties toward middle ground. Telling Zelensky, "I might not give you tomahawks unless you show flexibility." Telling Putin, "I might give Ukraine tomahawks unless you show flexibility." Playing both sides, hoping the threat of escalation or de-escalation can force compromise. It's quintessential Trump deal-making. But war is not a real estate negotiation. The stakes are existential. For Ukraine, this is about survival as an independent nation. For Russia, this is about restoring its sphere of influence and preventing NATO expansion. For the West, this is about defending the international rules-based order. These aren't positions you can split the difference on. Recent polling in Ukraine shows 74% support a negotiated peace along the current front line, backed by Western security guarantees. That's up from earlier in the war when the majority wanted complete territorial restoration. War weariness is real. 3 years of loss, suffering, and sacrifice have taken their toll. But the same polls show Ukrainians remain unwilling to formally cede territory or accept Russian sovereignty over occupied lands. They'll accept a frozen conflict but not capitulation. Russia's domestic situation is more opaque. State-controlled media portrays the war as a defensive operation against NATO expansion and Western aggression. Most Russians believe the propaganda or stay silent if they don't. Opposition to the war exists but is ruthlessly suppressed. Protests lead to imprisonment. Dissent is treason. For Putin, ending the war without tangible gains would be catastrophic politically. He's committed to achieving something he can call victory. And so we return to today, October 17, 2025. Zelensky and Trump sit across from each other in the White House. The meeting ends without definitive answers. Trump doesn't commit to tomahawks. Zelensky doesn't commit to territorial concessions. But the conversation continues. Back channels remain open. The Budapest summit with Putin looms in Ukraine. Soldiers fight and die in trenches that would be familiar to their great-grandfathers in World War I. In Russia, families mourn sons lost in a war they barely understand. In North Korea, more young men are being drafted for a foreign war they didn't know existed. In Washington, Brussels, Moscow, and Beijing, leaders maneuver for advantage, hoping their next move will be the one that finally brings this nightmare to an end. But history suggests otherwise. Wars don't end because everyone wants them to end. They end when one side wins decisively, or when both sides are too exhausted to continue, or when external circumstances force a resolution. The Russia-Ukraine war hasn't reached any of these points yet. Russia can't win militarily but won't accept political defeat. Ukraine can't expel Russia from its territory but won't accept permanent occupation. The West can't tolerate Russian victory but is increasingly war-weary. This stalemate could last years. Frozen conflicts in Europe have persisted for decades. The division of Cyprus since 1974, the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, Transnistria in Moldova, South Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia. These conflicts never formally end. They simply stop actively killing people while remaining unresolved. Is that Ukraine's future? A divided nation? Permanently split between free Ukraine in the west and Russian-occupied territories in the east? With a heavily militarized border, periodic flare-ups of violence and generations of Ukrainians growing up displaced from their ancestral homes? Or will something break? Will Ukraine receive the weapons it needs to change the military balance? Will Russia's economy collapse under the weight of sanctions and war costs? Will Putin die or be overthrown, creating an opportunity for negotiation with a new Russian leadership? Will Trump's deal-making somehow find the formula that has eluded everyone else? We don't know, but we can observe certain truths. First, Ukraine has survived against all odds. 3 years ago, Western intelligence gave Kyiv 48 hours. Today, Ukraine still fights, still resists, still believes in its future as a free and independent nation. That resilience deserves recognition and support. Second, this war matters to everyone everywhere. If Russia wins, if aggression succeeds, every authoritarian regime will draw the lesson that military force can rewrite borders. Taiwan, the Baltics, Moldova, Georgia, everywhere will become less safe. Third, technology is changing warfare in ways we're only beginning to understand. Cheap drones, AI targeting systems, cyber attacks, electronic warfare. The lessons being learned in Ukraine will define the next generation of conflict. Every military in the world is watching and adapting. Fourth, human suffering on this scale demands moral engagement. 1 million casualties, millions displaced, children growing up in bomb shelters, entire cities destroyed. Whatever your political views, whatever you think about geopolitics and great power competition, the humanitarian catastrophe of this war should move us to care about its resolution. And finally, the choices being made right now, in rooms like the Oval Office, in summits like the planned meeting in Budapest, will echo for decades. Will we look back on this moment as when the international community came together to stop aggression, or when the West blinked and the post-World War II order began its collapse? These questions don't have easy answers, but they deserve serious thought. Because October 2025 is not just another month in a long war. It's a pivot point. Decisions are being made. Weapons are being delivered or withheld. Negotiations are accelerating or stalling. And the outcomes will define not just Ukraine's future, but ours. As this documentary concludes, the war continues. Missiles are flying, soldiers are dying, diplomats are negotiating, and millions of Ukrainians wake up each morning not knowing if this will be the day a Russian missile destroys their home, or the day peace finally comes. For those of us watching from safety, the least we can do is pay attention. To understand what's really happening, beyond the headlines and the propaganda, to recognize the human cost of great power competition, and to hold our leaders accountable for the choices they make in our name. The Russia-Ukraine war in October 2025 is not over, not even close, but it's at a moment of possibility, where the decisions of the next few weeks could set the trajectory for years to come. Will it end in negotiated peace? Frozen conflict? Ukrainian victory? Russian conquest? Nobody knows. But the world is watching, and the stakes have never been higher. This is the war in real time, day 1329 and counting. May wisdom prevail, may courage endure, and may this conflict find resolution before another 1329 days pass.